Hello, I'm Laquesta Burak and welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories today: schools are closed, sports events cancelled, and flights are grounded around the world as countries scramble to stem the coronavirus pandemic. In other news, in Zimbabwe, relief for some landowners as the slow road to compensation finally takes off under the new government. And South Sudan President Salva Kiir names the country's new cabinet, a key step towards peace after years of civil war. And in sport, the Confederation of African Football postpones this month's Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers because of the coronavirus. Hello, thank you for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Well, the COVID-19 virus continues to spread around the world. Let's take a look. This is the live picture coming from Johns Hopkins University. That epicenter started in Asia. It has now jumped to Europe, and a close eye being kept on America, where there have been questions about the efficiency of the US testing regime. So no part of life remains untouched. Those financial markets continue to suffer with the jitters. Uncertainty, of course, the enemy of the markets. In Asia, they dropped sharply on Friday, whilst European bourses recovered some ground after days of freefall. And this virus is not picky. The highest echelons of power are also feeling the effects. Australia's Home Affairs Minister has COVID-19. Brazil's President Bolsonaro says his test was negative, and the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is self-isolating after his wife tested positive for the virus. And from the world of sport, well, there is so much going on. We're going to get the latest from Piers in the programme. And, well, schools out in the US, parts of Germany, Austria, Lithuania and Algeria, affecting not only millions of students, but parents as well, working parents. So let's get the latest from our correspondents across Africa. Rhoda Odiambo is in Nairobi. Thomas Nardi is in Accra for us. But first, let's cross to Nomsa Maseko in Johannesburg.
We have confirmed that 24 people have now tested positive for COVID-19 here in South Africa, but still all eyes are still in the Limpopo province, where the 122 mostly South African students are going to be kept in quarantine at a hotel there, and that place is already currently under lockdown, and it is now under military surveillance. No one is allowed to be there, but there are people who live in that province who are still unhappy about the fact that the government has chosen that area to quarantine the students who have all tested negative, I might add. But at the same time, there is going to be a special cabinet meeting this Sunday to discuss the latest crisis. But more importantly, what is now going to be happening is that next week the government is going to be meeting with religious leaders, because there are concerns that religious gatherings, particularly around the Easter period, there could be a possibility that they need to be suspended, particularly the Zion Christian Church, which has about 10 million members, and they descend to Moria, which is in Limpopo. It's about a 25-kilometer drive from the place where the people are going to be quarantined, and they normally gather around Easter, and the people there are saying that they still want to go and gather, but it remains to be seen what the government is going to be saying, particularly around religious gatherings, but also if people themselves are going to heed the call should the government suspend those gatherings. And now, for more on the picture in East Africa, we're now joined by Rhoda Odiambo, who is in Nairobi.
Well, today East Africa confirmed its first case, and this was in Kenya. The health ministry said that the patient traveled from the US and moved then to London and arrived in Kenya on March 5th. Samples were taken from her when she noticed that she wasn't feeling well, and the test came back positive. So after the Ministry of Health confirmed the first case in the country, we went to the streets of Nairobi to find out what Kenyans had to say about this.
Yes, I think I'm confident that they are prepared. First of all, today with the announcement that we already have a case in this country, gives us confidence that the government is giving proper reports. Yeah.
Specifically because I don't think they're serious about what they're doing. Like, I don't feel like they're taking more precautions on what they're doing at the airport and all the borders. But I'm not just safe. I just feel like I'm still not safe in this country, you know.
They have put systems in place to ensure that the disease is under control. So I'm sure if we follow what we've been told by medics, surely we will be able to control the disease.
As a precautionary measure, the government has suspended all public meetings, schools, and they've also advised players in the transport industry that they should provide hand sanitizers to members of the public who use public transport from their day-to-day activities. For more on the picture in the continent, we cross over to my colleague in Accra, Thomas Nadi.
Well, in Ghana, the authorities have initiated a contact tracing process after confirming 2 cases of COVID-19 on Thursday. It is to help them identify persons who might have come into contact with the patients. The 2 patients returned to Ghana from Norway and then Turkey a week ago. One of them is a Ghanaian and is staff of the UNDP. The other is a Norwegian national and works for the Norwegian embassy in Accra. In fact, we understand the entire staff of the Norwegian embassy have been quarantined. Ghana's Ministry of Health has indicated that the 2 patients are being isolated and are in stable condition. This development comes a day after President Akufo-Addo announced the release of $100 million for coronavirus preparedness and response nationwide. He has also banned public officials temporarily from traveling abroad, indicating that only essential assignments will be approved. Some planned events in Ghana have also been cancelled. I've been speaking to some Ghanaians on the streets of Accra, and there are genuine concerns about the virus. Some have even suggested that authorities should close the country's borders. But the Ghanaian authorities have assured the nation that they are monitoring the development and will take appropriate actions to keep Ghana safe.
Thank you very much indeed for that update of what's going on the continent. Okay, let's take a more detailed look now at what's happening across the continent. A number of countries, including Algeria, Egypt and Togo, were already dealing with a handful of cases. And even though the numbers are relatively small compared to Europe and Asia, Africa is starting to see the virus spread. Guinea, Gabon and Sudan have all confirmed their first cases. Sudan, in fact, has recorded its first death. And they've gone as far as to say that visas will no longer be issued to people travelling from countries affected. And that includes China, Italy, France and Spain. The new epicentre, of course, is Europe. There are also visa restrictions in Cameroon, where travellers need to provide proof that they have tested negative for the virus before they're allowed to enter the country. Tunisia is now has a mandatory requirement for all incoming travellers to self-quarantine on arrival, and it's bad news for any travellers between Morocco and France. No trips allowed, plane or sea. Everything has been suspended. Ethiopia, well, this demonstrates the cost. They've set aside $8 million to fight the pandemic, whilst the Kenyan government has said that officials should not be travelling unless it is essential. In Burundi, travellers from the EU, which have now been described, as I said, by the WHO as the epicentre, now face immediate quarantine. And finally, let's go to the island nation of the Comoros. Monitoring systems are being put in place at a port, the port of Moroni, as of Monday, and they say that's to test travellers for signs of the disease. So they're preempting it like many countries around the world. So that's the situation in Africa as it stands. Those numbers are slowly climbing. But what about practical measures that we can all take to stop the spread of the virus? Let's have a listen at the latest advice from the World Health Organization.
Washing your hands with soap and water, using an alcohol-based rub, making sure that you also practice respiratory etiquette. You are sneezing into your elbow or coughing into your elbow, making sure that we mobilize all of our population. It is very important that every single person on the planet knows what the signs and symptoms of COVID-19 are. The signs and symptoms of COVID-19 is not sneezing and having a runny nose. It's a fever. It's a dry cough. It's aches and pains. It's very important that we know those differences. Some people will also have difficulty breathing. And so knowing what the signs and symptoms are, knowing what your risk may be, will help protect you and help protect your family.
Okay, so that was the latest advice. Lots of you have been asking, saying, how bad is it going to be if I get COVID-19? Well, it affects people in different ways. It depends on your age, your underlying health conditions. So let's hear from somebody who has been through it. Andrew O'Dwyer is a British man who contracted the coronavirus. He was skiing in northern Italy. Here's his account of what it's like to go through the virus.
I've had worse flu, without a doubt. I'd say the most debilitating aspect is the uncontrollable coughing. That is probably the worst bit. The rest of it, the fevers, is no different to a normal flu-type symptoms. And I'd say it's not to be worried about. I've not been concerned whatsoever. However, I am a diabetic, insulin dependent, and so I do have underlying health concerns. But for me personally, I would say that it isn't anything to worry about. I haven't suffered anything major, and I felt probably in good health at most of the times.
That was Andrew O'Dwyer there. He was in Italy and contracted COVID-19. Let's catch up on the other stories making headlines across Africa. And the Ivorian president, Alassane Ouattara, has named a close ally as the ruling party's candidate to succeed him. Mr. Ouattara is not seeking re-election, and he said that Amadou Gon Coulibaly, the current prime minister, had the support of the vast majority of party members. And in Egypt, at least 5 people have died following extreme weather conditions in Kenya province. A 6-year-old boy was killed after a tree fell on his house. Heavy rains and sandy winds have hit the region hard. And we've actually had a state of emergency that's been declared in the country. Now, what's going on in South Sudan? Well, President Salva Kiir has unveiled the country's new cabinet. The announcement comes 3 weeks after both he and the former rebel leader, Riek Machar, agreed to form a government in a bid to end the country's bitter 6-year civil war that's left at least 400,000 people dead. There had been concerns, though, that disagreements over those key positions would threaten national unity. Well, President Kiir has named Angelina Teny, the wife of Mr. Machar, as Defence Minister, the first woman to hold the position. Well, let's discuss this a little bit further. And here with me is Mary Harper, our Africa editor. And Mary, so is everyone happy with that lineup then?
Well, it's an interesting lineup, and it's particularly interesting that the wife of President Salva Kiir's former sworn enemy, Riek Machar, is now Defence Minister. So it's a very interesting combination of people, and the fact that both a husband and wife are going to be sitting in the same cabinet is also quite an exceptionally strange thing to a turn of events. But I think it does show that there are at least attempts to really bring those two sides together, two sides that essentially have fallen to fighting every previous occasion they've tried to form a unity government.
And this is actually their third attempt at a cabinet. I mean, just how much confidence is there in this third attempt?
I think the international community, anybody that wants South Sudan to be peaceful at last, Africa's youngest country that fell to fighting soon after independence, they have been very concerned. They've been putting massive pressure on both Salva Kiir, the president, and Riek Machar, former rebel leader, to come to some kind of agreement about this. But I think given the past, that they've fallen apart so quickly and fallen to fighting, I don't think there's a huge amount of confidence that this is going to be any more successful. And
very quickly, Mary, how badly does the government, the country, need stability?
It is so tragic. South Sudan is one of the most tragic places on the continent in terms of violence, in terms of human suffering, in terms of hardship. It desperately needs peace if it's going to succeed in any way as an independent country.
Okay, Mary Harper, thank you very much for that overview. Thank you very much. You are, of course, watching Focus on Africa on BBC World News. I'm Lukwesa Burak. Stay with us because after the break, the all-important sports news, and so much is going on. Piers will have all the latest for us. Welcome back to Focus on Africa. I'm Lukwesa Burak. Let's remind you of our top story. And the coronavirus pandemic has forced schools to close in countries across the world, whilst football competitions have been cancelled. And we're going to get the rest of this right here on the programme, particularly that sports news. In the meantime, though, Zimbabwe is offering foreign nationals and Zimbabwean black farmers land as compensation for farms that were seized under the controversial land takeover programme. Now, they were often violent. They intensified during the year of 2000 and affected thousands of mainly white farmers, disrupting the country's agricultural production, and it really did strain diplomatic ties with Western nations. Well, the BBC's Shingai Nyoka has more on this from Harare.
Over 5,000 farms were seized in the takeovers, hundreds of them foreign-owned and protected by international treaties. But that didn't stop the seizures. Then leader Robert Mugabe wanted to address colonial-era imbalances, where 70% of the best farming land was in the hands of about 4,000 white farmers, and he warned them not to resist.
I will declare the fight to be on. And it will be a fight to the finish, I can tell you. And they won't win the fight, we will win it.
It's a fight that Zimbabwe seems to be gradually backing down from, mostly as a result of international pressure. Some foreign nationals whose farms were seized have successfully sued for compensation in international courts. The new regulations will affect only foreigners and indigenous blacks. They will be able to apply for their land back. Local white farmers will still only be compensated for improvements such as buildings and the farm implements that they left behind, and not for the land. Under Emerson Mnangagwa's government, they've been allowed to rent farms, but only in partnership with blacks. Last year, Zimbabwe began a broad-based compensation program, but paid out about $16 million, a fraction of the billions farmers believe they are owed. The new regulations could move cash-strapped Zimbabwe closer to resolving this long-standing land dispute, one that has isolated it from Western countries. Paying compensation is one of the central conditions to restoring full diplomatic ties with the West and ending US sanctions. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News, Harare.
Well, we have been saying it. Lots of sporting news, and Piers is here with all of that. Hi, Piers.
Hello, Lukwesa. Well, news on the Premier League coming up, but we start with the decision by the Confederation of African Football to postpone this month's 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers because of the coronavirus. Some 48 matches and nearly as many countries have been set to take place across the continent in the final week of March, but these have now been postponed. CAF has explained that the decision has been taken because many African internationals are based in either Europe or Asia, two continents heavily affected by the outbreak. They also mentioned the fact that some clubs are refusing to release their players, particularly ones in Italy where there's lockdown. Now, the news will please many African FAs who had requested the change, and one man who's certainly happy with the decision is Zambia coach Milutin Micho Sredojevic.
To prevent even one life is meaning much more than any matches. Ethically looking at everything, no match is more valuable than human life. Football is just a game that is meaning life to us. However, when it's question of preventing certain things, no boundaries are supposed to be crossed in that regard.
Zambia coach there. Well, CAF did not comment on a possible delay for the African Nations Championship today. That's because on Saturday, members of CAF's medical committee will be in Cameroon to assess what provisions are being made for the tournament for African players based in their own championships. Elsewhere, some other African events have been cancelled today, or postponed, I should say. South Africa's one-day international series in India has been rescheduled to an unspecified later date. That's in cricket. 2 games of the 3-game series remain. Also today, the tour of Australia's women cricketers to South Africa has been postponed, as has a women's rugby 7 series in South Africa as well at the end of the month. But even bigger postponements have come elsewhere. Today, not only was the German Bundesliga's next round of matches postponed, but the English Premier League has announced it has suspended all matches until at least April the 3rd. It comes after Arsenal's manager Mikel Arteta tested positive for the coronavirus. All Arsenal's first-team players, including Gabonese captain Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Ivorian winger Nicolas Pepe, are now self-isolating. Both Chelsea, with Callum Hudson-Odoi, and Everton have also had players test positive. Some of them are self-isolating as well. And speaking before the announcement was made this morning, Newcastle United coach Steve Bruce backed a possible postponement.
Well, up until yesterday, we were pretty convinced that it was going ahead. So there was no real... The last 24 hours has been the concern and the breaking news, of course, of a Premier League manager being infected. And then all of a sudden you've got players. And as I said, I just mentioned that to my staff, what happens if 1 or 2 players contract this problem? And unfortunately, it's happened in the last 24 hours. So I can't see any alternative than to suspend it and see where we are in a few weeks.
But as said, it's not just football that's being affected. The Formula One season has been delayed. Golf's first major of the year, the Masters, has been postponed. And today, the Boston and London marathons, both set for next month, were also delayed. And as you can imagine, this is causing havoc for the various sports practitioners. Kenya's Henry Boyd had been training for the Milan Marathon, also cancelled.
I must accept. Health comes first. So I've been training quite a while, from December all through, and I've been focusing on Milano Marathon on 5th April. As an athlete who might depend mainly on racing, I feel disappointed because I've prepared for quite some time and I've spent a lot of resources.
That's all the sport. And Laquesa, I should tell you, I've never known a week like it at work. Every few minutes you're getting another announcement. Madrid are going into self-isolation. Juventus clubs, every minute, either a tournament, a club was affected by this outbreak.
I know. Piers, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's a question. How do you clean up oil spillages without causing further damage? Traditionally, there's one option called a dispersant. It breaks the oil down into tiny droplets, but it's still in the water. So scientists have been concerned that they could actually be doing more harm than good, and they're toxic too. Well, step in this plant. Normally, it's regarded as a rampant weed, a pest of a plant. But in Benin, the water hyacinth, which is a member of the lily family, is producing really impressive results, naturally mopping up our environmental disasters.
On va mimer une fuite comme elle peut survenir dans des canalisations.
We will mimic a leak as it can occur in an industrial pipe system, and we will absorb the leak with a fiber. I'm going to pour a little bit of oil into the container, and then drop some of the absorbent fiber on top.
De la fibre absorbante.
I'll put a bit here.
Un peu là. Voilà. Et on constate que de manière très rapide.
You notice that very quickly, in just a matter of seconds. You can clean up the spill without needing anything other than a bit of natural absorbent fiber. My name is Fola Moftau, and I run Greenkeeper Africa. Originally, the water hyacinth is a relatively beneficial plant because it acts as a natural filter in the water. The problem is, without any natural predators, it reproduces at an alarming rate.
Good news there. Have a fantastic weekend. Goodbye.